Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Ghosts and Spirits video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here, once again based on one of your new suggestions. This one having to do with a weird, almost mishmash of sorts when it comes to it being possibly a ghost and then also a cryptid. In fact, I was debating for a little bit of being able to include this instead on the cryptids and monsters side, but the fact that most people seem to associate it mostly with a ghostly woman made me realize that maybe I should include it here within this playlist. And it has to do with a specific area you can go to this day. You know how much I love those. And when you do, you may have a chance of encountering this ghostly apparition. But interestingly enough, you're going to hear it first rather than seeing it. And in fact, that's what it's most famous for. In fact, you're looking at a representation of it now. Goes by a very unique name too. It's known as the Screamer of White Bluff. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating info associated with this very, very unique spectral apparition. So here's how the story goes. You have to go to a very small town in Tennessee that's called White Bluff in order to encounter this spirit. That's why essentially it's called the White Bluff Screamer. This town is very, very small. In fact, looking at the latest census population, you're looking at something that's maybe about just 3,000 plus people. And that was just from a few years ago. Goes to show again just how tiny that is compared to others. I mean, I swear my apartment complex here, which has multiple units, it probably has more than 3,000 people just within the apartment complex itself, and yet here you have this town it's altogether that is just around that same population. But yeah, the town is also very, very old. It was first constructed as a fort back in 1806, so how about that, over 200 years plus. And then ever since then it's grown and it's had some population bursts here and there, but for the most part it's remained small, mainly because of the area, the workforce there. It seems to be just mainly on the lines of mills and some small businesses, and people go visit it every now and then. But otherwise, the idea is this is a small town with this very notorious spectral spirit. So let's talk about that now here. So it's basically known as the White Screamer because you hear it before you see it. In fact, this scream that this thing does is so ghastly, like it's so shocking, that the notion is that it actually drives people mad. If you hear it, in other words, you will actually go crazy because of the way that the sound sounds. I don't know if it's exactly like if it's something psychological or if it's something like in terms of the way the sound tunes in your mind. But either way, though, people are driven completely insane after a couple of seconds of hearing this scream. The way it sounds like, though, is it starts off like a scream, like a woman in great distress. However, it changes either somewhere within the same scream or somewhere afterward into something along the lines of a very savage beast. Like it's also apparently more on the lines of a large creature, something identified as a horrible beast. Again, hard to tell if this is mostly involving, like, let's say the side of a ghost, or if it happens to be mostly on the side of a cryptid. But here's where again it ties into it being mostly on the ghostly side. People that go across this area, you have to go to a location called the White Bluff area, which looks to be in just the middle of a plain old forest, somewhere where essentially you're in there and it's almost like you're by yourself for who knows how far. When it comes to that location, probably from one end of the scenery to the other, that's all you're going to see is just basically forest upon forest. And hunters go by there, drivers, there are roads that go to and from that location. Sometimes they're driving there and that's when they hear it as well. But yeah, when they do so and they hear it for a couple of seconds, again, it sounds very, very horrible. But the very few circumstances where people see something, that's where they describe it as being a ghostly apparition. Something along the lines of either a woman, in fact it's in the shape of a woman and it looks very woman-like, almost harkens towards the side of being La Llorona, another famous spectral ghost, especially down here in South Texas. And then when people see it, it disappears. It either sees them and it outright disappears, or people run across after obviously coming into something like this, hearing something like that and then seeing the woman themselves, they run away. But when they come back, the telltale signs are that there's this almost like charred grass or charred remain wherever this figure was. This creature or woman, whatever it is there, and then it's gone, and people, when they come back, they see nothing but essentially the remnants of whatever it was within the grass. Very fascinating stuff, because again, it throws it up into the air as to exactly what this thing is. Is it really a La Llorona type creature? In other words, a woman, somebody that encountered something horrific but then became something else, a different creature altogether? Or is it altogether something along the lines of an actual cryptid, a beast, something like a dog or other type of creature that has been mentioned as well? Who knows? But people that have heard it have had just a tiny amount of experience, because they are there just for a few seconds before they leave. There is, though, this story that harkens back to the 1920s as far as someone having an even more time period, like when it comes to an encounter with this white screamer, and unfortunately ended up in a tragic circumstance. Here how it goes. There was a young man, anonymous, no name associated with him. His wife, and his 7 children ended up actually making a home within that White Bluff area. I don't know if they knew the legends associated with this white screamer, but otherwise they decided to make their home there. But as soon as they did so, on a nightly basis, they would wake up to the sound of what they described as a blood-curdling scream. It was so bad, in fact, that the children, all 7 of them, would not sleep at all. Like, they would essentially be inconsolable. You could just imagine with one child, like, let's say, going crazy when it comes to these screams, and they in turn crying and making their own screams. Imagine all 7 whenever this happened. So finally, on one specific night, when this guy just couldn't handle it anymore, he decided he wanted to take care of business. Whatever it was that was out there, maybe again at that point he had finally heard about the legends of the White Screamer, or maybe he didn't care. Either way, though, he decided to go out with his rifle and then see what he could do about it. But when he figured that he thought the nearby hills would show the origin of this white screamer, unfortunately, there was nothing. He heard the sounds that were coming, and they were almost like mysterious as far as their origin. It almost played like these sounds were traveling through one point to another. You know how people play that game sometimes where they can create sounds, like it sounds like from another location, but it truly is from a separate place. That's what it basically sounded like here. But he looked and looked and looked, but found nothing when it comes to the location of this white screamer. But when he was heading back, he did hear some more screams, but tragically, he realized quickly that this was not from this white screamer or whatever it was that was causing the screams from before. Instead, it was from his own family. So he ran back as quickly as he could. He recognized that they were coming from his wife, they were coming from his children, but when he went back to the house, it was too little too late. That's when he saw the screaming had stopped, because their bodies were there in the cabin. They were dead. They were essentially just driven mad by whatever we're hearing. I guess this white screamer must have come by very close by to their location, and when that happened, it had driven them insane with the nearby screams of it. And so there he was, finding this very horrific sight as to his entire family just now dead from this encounter. And the story goes, you can actually still find that house and the graves from this encounter there on White Bluff. And I found that very interesting too, because that could be a very telltale sign as far as evidence associated with what occurred to this family, and again the origins associated with this white screamer of White Bluff causing it altogether. Very fascinating stuff, again, because there's stories and then there's actual evidence, and here you have something like this along the lines. But that's pretty much it. That's all the information associated with this notorious white screamer of White Bluff. People still hear whatever this is, if it's either a woman or some other type of creature making these sounds on a nightly basis. And person that suggested it, in fact, said that they heard it a little over 20 years ago. And, that just goes to show that it's still coming about to this very day. So if anybody has any more info, anything else I might have missed as far as this white screamer, then please go ahead and do so. Please post it in the comments. What about those of you that are in that location in the White Bluff area there in Tennessee? Maybe you drove by there at one point, or maybe you lived there at one point, or maybe you had family members and so on that also live there and others that know about that place. If you have a more local experience, maybe even your own encounter associated with this White Bluff, then I'd definitely love to hear. It might be one of those things too where I'd love to be able to go by there one day, try to camp out at night, and then try to see if I could hear this creature and its presence. You better believe that if I hear it very close by, I'm not going to stay too long afterward. I know my limits when it comes to these things, and if I hear it very close by, I am definitely getting in my car and I'm getting out of there at that point. But yes, I would love to hear anyone's local experiences. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.